In today's lesson, we are going to look at how some young animals develop, which is a little bit different than what we typically think about with humans, because we know that all living things grow and change and reproduce during their lifetimes, and many animals, most vertebrates, look like small versions of the adults. So a puppy looks like a dog, a kitten looks like a cat, a little baby looks like a human. But there are animals that undergo or go through a process that's called metamorphosis, or major body changes as they develop from young organisms to adults, which means that the young don't look anything like what they're going to look like when they become full grown. So we're going to look at a few different types of metamorphosis. And the first that we want to look at is what's called complete metamorphosis that we see in some insects. So the first stage we're going to look at is called complete metamorphosis. In complete metamorphosis, there are 4 distinct different stages. You have egg, larva, pupa, and adult. So we see those over here on the right-hand side. We see the eggs, the larva, the pupa, and the adult. Notice in that diagram that the larva looks nothing like the pupa looks nothing like the adult. So that's what we talk about, or that's what we mean when we talk about metamorphosis, is that the young look very different than what they will look like as an adult. So the first thing that happens is that the egg hatches into a larva, and the larva usually looks something like a worm. Larval form will typically look like a worm. If you're thinking about like a butterfly larval stage, that's a caterpillar. So if you've seen a caterpillar, a woolly worm, you're looking at the larva stage of that insect. After a time, the larva enters the next stage, which is called the pupa. And during the pupal stage, the insect is enclosed in a protective covering. So when you think about the cocoon or the chrysalis of a butterfly, that's the pupa stage. It's not eating, it's moving very, very little, but it's not resting. There's lots of changes going on inside as that larva during the pupa stage is transforming into the adult. So major changes in the body structure take place in this stage as the pupa becomes an adult. So at the bottom here, we see this is the egg stage for the monarch butterfly. This would be the larval stage of the monarch butterfly. Here is the pupa stage as it's in its chrysalis. And on the next page, you can see as it fully emerges as the butterfly, as we'll go over in just a second. So again, these are the steps of complete metamorphosis. There are 4 stages. You have eggs. The eggs hatch and turn into a larva. The larva is sort of when it feeds and gets all of its nutrients. It then goes into the pupa stage where the body transforms and emerges as the adult. So just like there is complete metamorphosis, there is also incomplete metamorphosis. So here we have on this page the finishing of the complete metamorphosis. You can see here was the cocoon for the butterfly, and then it emerged as the adult. So now I want to look at incomplete metamorphosis. So in contrast to complete metamorphosis, incomplete metamorphosis has no distinct larval stage. It has 3 stages, which are egg, nymph, and adult. So the egg will hatch into a stage called the nymph. It usually looks like a small version of the adult, but it doesn't have wings. Then as that nymph grows, it sheds its exoskeleton several times as it gets bigger before becoming an adult. So In incomplete metamorphosis, then, you basically have three stages. You have the egg stage, you have the nymph stage, if you will, there. So the young nymph looks much like the young adult. It just doesn't have wings. It will go through a series of losing its exoskeleton as it becomes larger, and then it eventually becomes the adult. So this is what we call incomplete metamorphosis. So complete metamorphosis, we had 4 stages. You had the egg, larva, pupa, and adult. And then in incomplete metamorphosis, you have 3 stages: egg, nymph, adult, even though the nymph does change during the course of being a nymph. And then lastly, one type of metamorphosis that we are probably all familiar with is the frog. So what happens here is that the adult frog, they reproduce sexually. However, those eggs are fertilized outside of the female's body. So if you remember in lesson 1 of this chapter, we talked about external fertilization, and this is an example of that. So the adult frog reproduces sexually, but the eggs are fertilized outside of the female's body. After the eggs have been fertilized, a tadpole will hatch from the egg. Over some time, the hind legs will begin to develop. Notice that it still has its tail so that it can get through the water. And then eventually that tail becomes absorbed and the frog emerges from the water so that it can live sort of on land and in water. Notice that the eggs and tadpole form of this life cycle need to remain in the water. It's not until it becomes an adult frog that it can start to live in and out of the water. So it's important to understand again that the larva of the frog is called a tadpole. So I think we all know tadpole and frog, but we may never have thought about the fact that the tadpole is actually a larval stage for the frog. The tadpoles look very different from the adult frogs. So we have looked at 3 different types of metamorphosis here. We saw that in insects, you have complete metamorphosis, and it's 4 stages of egg, larva, pupa, adult. We saw that you can have incomplete metamorphosis, where there are 3 stages of egg, nymph, and adult. And then we looked at the metamorphosis of a frog, where the eggs are fertilized externally. They hatch as a tadpole, which is the larval stage, and then they develop over time into the adult frog. And I'll see you next time.